Glad you're here with us on Morning Express, and I must say that was a very, very interesting newsroom. It got pretty warm in here, and interesting views coming across. And as Sophia had mentioned, she's going to be sampling some of your comments. I'm sure there's some that are coming through via Twitter. I actually read through, I was following up on the conversation via Twitter, what's going on, and interesting there. But now it's time for us to change gears and move to something equally warm. And this is in regards to finding your spouse or finding a mate who you're going to have a long-term relationship with in life. Because I know that many of us will agree it is quite a journey that one finds challenges along the way. Because how do you zero in? How do you identify and say this is the one? We'll be finding out, is there anything like love at first sight? You know, you watch all those movies and you see this guy who looks at a girl and suddenly, kaboom, they just fall in love and they have the best relationship ever. And remember the stories that we'd read in books where the end is normally they lived happily ever after. Is that a real world or is that utopia? Well, we'll be defining that. Remember, this is a conversation that you're welcome to join in. We'll open the phone lines later on and you can fill us in with your experiences. Maybe also let us know what are some of the things that you've encountered along the journey. There may be challenges. Others may have sweet stories where they can say, yes, mine was love at first sight and it's been happily ever after. We'd love to hear from you. We'll open the phone lines and they'll be displayed on your screens. But remember, the Twitter handle is at Michael G. Gitonga. Now, joining me today is Chris Hart, who's a relationship expert. I must say that Ken Oko was supposed to be on the set today as well, who's a sociologist, but could not make it due to circumstances beyond his control. So it's just Chris and I and you at home. So Chris, welcome and thank you for coming.
Pleasure.
Great. Now, finding a spouse. This is a journey that many of us must agree is quite bumpy, more often than not. And I'm sure it might be safe to say, I'm sure there's not one size that fits all for this, but yes, there must be some laid down guidelines and rules that one can look at. But first of all, when it comes to finding the spouse or the mate, what are some of the things that somebody needs to look out for?
Well, the most important thing is actually the ability to be honest with that person. You know, it's very easy to say, oh, I want somebody who's tall, dark, handsome, you know, the usual thing. It's pretty compelling to say that they must have a job and they must have a similar background to you and so on. And all these things do matter. But you can tell the difference between a relationship that's starting well and might become a permanent relationship and one that definitely isn't by just what happens in the first few minutes. If in the first few minutes you find that you are telling the truth about yourself and you're beginning to realize that they're doing the same, then you've set off down the spouse track. You see what I mean?
All right.
Now, picture the scene, you know, it's 2 a.m. in some sleazy bar and boy meets girl and they start telling each other whoppers. And
they're both under the influence of one thing or the other. Yes,
that's right. And they're both telling each other all sorts of crazy stories. Clearly that is not going to make it. Those two are going to have a very rocky ride indeed. But now picture the same two people meeting in the afternoon over a cup of coffee and it's a sort of business environment and they just start networking and suddenly they're telling the truth to one another. Now they're going to...
What constitutes the truth? Because I could tell you the truth, but I'm telling you what I feel safe to tell you. For instance, it might be true I'm a good businessman. It might be true that I have, you know, 5 siblings. What truth now goes beyond that barrier?
Well, initially, of course, people don't tell the whole truth. Inevitably, I'm going to be a bit cautious with a stranger. Right. So I might not even tell you where I live, but I don't tell an out-and-out lie. So I'll admit that I live in Nairobi, for example. I will tell you a little bit about my job. I won't tell you too much because I'm just not quite sure about you yet. But as a few minutes go by and I begin to realize that you're responding in kind, we start exchanging more and more detailed information. And over the course of 2 or 3 weeks, we will swap all the key information. Now, the contrary situation is one where you've started a relationship and you suddenly realize, I don't actually know this character's friends. I don't really know where they work. I'm not too certain where they live. They have a habit of not answering the phone at certain times. Already you're beginning to wonder what's going on in that person's life.
Now, one of the things that may drive a person not to tell the entire truth is the fact that you're trying to impress the other person. So you're not giving them details. How does one know that somebody's guard is still up, and as a result, I'm still trying to impress? I mean, the old feeling of the peacock comes into play, where, you know, you're at your best foot forward to impress, and that always happens. It's just a natural thing.
Well, again, you see, this says something about where spouses meet. It used to be that we all met in very Disney-like situations. We all met in parties, we all met in gatherings of one sort or another. People don't do that anymore. People actually meet their spouses in work environments, through mutual friends and so on, in situations where we are living our normal life. We haven't gone to that event to find a spouse. We've actually gone to that event to earn our daily bread. So we're just being our normal self. And again, you see, you set off on a track where you're basically telling the truth. Now, yes, everybody does exaggerate. And I've got some dreadful stories of people who really told some whoppers the first day they met. And a year or so later, it came back and bit them. So you shouldn't do it. Be careful. You shouldn't do it, yes. So in other words, you know, don't borrow someone else's best suit to go out and meet a spouse, because it's not yours. And you're going to have to own up to it sooner or later.
Yeah, and I guess there's importance in somebody loving you when that point comes, when they eventually love you for who you are.
Yeah.
Because for how long can you pretend?
The whole idea about finding a spouse is that you want to find somebody who likes the person you really are. You do not want somebody to fall in love with the person you're pretending to be, because that is unsustainable. You can't actually do that for long. It's okay for a night or two, but pretty soon, you know, that you can't afford the lifestyle or whatever it is that you're pretending to have. So you mustn't do that. If you're serious about wanting to find a spouse, you need to have that in your mind, and from then on, whenever you talk to somebody, you tell them the truth.
Okay. Well, if you're watching us at home and you're wondering what we're talking about, it's finding your spouse, finding the right person in your life that you'd want to spend the rest of your life with. And with me is Chris Hart, who's a relationship expert. We're going to open the phone lines now. I would love to hear from you. Maybe you have a question, maybe it is a comment, maybe it is an experience that you've gone through. Is there a thing as love at first sight? And that's the next question to you, Chris. Is there such a thing, or should we leave that to the movies and the books?
Pretty much we should leave it to the movies. It does happen very rarely. Very occasionally I meet someone who says it happened to them, and they do describe a pretty earth-shattering moment, you know, this sudden realization that something has happened. But very often it then goes sour. It's not a predictor of success, it's just one of those weird hormonal moments. And yes, it's pretty electrifying as it happens. Unfortunately, it can lead you to make a lot of mistakes. A lot of things can go wrong. So yes, nice if it happens to you, but be very cynical about it.
Be very cautious.
Yes.
Now, is there a significant difference between love at first sight and lust at first sight? Because for you to like somebody and, you know, feel that this is it, there's got to be something that is attractive about them. So is there a way of defining the difference between love at first sight and lust at first sight?
I don't think real love ever happens in the first few minutes. Lust happens instantaneously. You know, if I meet that pair of eyes and it looks back at me with a big smile, I'm going to be off my feet in minutes. But we all know about that. And if you go back to the early stage of our lives where we know we're not going to get married, we take great pleasure in enjoying the results of that. We have a lot of exciting dates and get up to all sorts of mischief. And we all know it's not love, it's lust. It's just enjoyment of youth and all the rest of it. And most people take that at face value. I mean, they do occasionally say foolish things like, we're obviously going to be together forever. Well, if somebody at the age of 21 says that to you, it's not really going to happen. No, it isn't.
That's utopia. It's wishful thinking.
It's wishful thinking, yes. It's only later when people establish themselves, their personality's stable, they've settled in life, and they suddenly think, I need to have wife, a husband. And from that moment on, they start behaving differently.
Okay. Now, one of the things that obviously causes one to exaggerate, like you've called it, or overemphasize certain things that you want to impress your spouse or your potential mate with, is the fact that you want them to think of you in a certain way. How important is it for you to be yourself right from the word go?
Well, everybody should, of course, make the best of themselves. So, I mean, people should buy the right clothes, have the right lifestyle, but they should be mostly driven by what they love doing and their purpose in life, and they should actually be trying to sell that to their potential spouse. If I spend all my earnings on the flashiest car and the fanciest clothes, sooner or later people will see that I'm actually very shallow. And there's nothing really there. What people are really drawn to is real, solid success in what you're doing. You know, the fact that you found the right job and you are doing well in it, and there's clearly a progression going on that's going to lead to you to being a very stable family man. And the same for the woman. She's obviously going to present herself as best she can. She's going to choose the nicest clothes, the tallest heels, the whole shooting match. But we all know we're not actually buying that. We're buying her values, her character, the sort of person she is, and those are the things, again, that people will look for when they're looking for a spouse.
Okay, I guess naturally one can tell that this is not the real you. There must be something within us that can almost tell, okay, fine.
Oh, men in particular are absolutely brilliant at spotting the difference between a new girlfriend and a potential wife. They do it within seconds.
Men? I would have thought it's the other way around. They say that women have more intuition than men.
Women take longer to do it. Women are much more cautious. They treat every man they meet as a rogue for the first little while, until he begins to prove himself. Yes, they see his behavior developing and they say, okay, this guy's okay. But men have this uncanny knack of looking at a woman, and almost before they've finished smiling, she's either a girlfriend, one night stand, or she's being treated completely differently because she's got wife stamped there.
Now, is there a different in form of treatment now for the ladies? The men probably would do that subconsciously and treat her as a girlfriend who I have no intention of having anything to do with, and a wife I'll probably treat also differently. For the sake of the ladies, what's the difference in how you treat them? You mean
what's the difference in the way the men treat them?
Yes, how do the men treat them, so that if a lady is receiving that treatment, she can tell I'm being treated as girlfriend material. Yes. Whereas the other one can say, okay, maybe he actually does see like I have potential.
Well, the guy who thinks he's just met another girlfriend is pretty brash, pretty confident. He's moving as fast as he can go because he's really hoping to score that night. You know, he really lays it all on with the trowel. The guy who thinks he might have met his wife, he's much more cautious. He's actually more nervous. He's actually suddenly thought, oh, wow, and so
I don't want to mess this up.
I don't want to mess this up. Yes, exactly. So he holds back a little. He's a bit more polite. He's a little more diffident. The language is nicer. It's politer. It's the whole thing it's just being done a little slower. When he starts to suggest a date, it's a different sort of date. Instead of saying, oh, well, I'm going to be in such and such a place on Saturday, should we hang out? It'll be a proper phone call saying, would you like to go out on Saturday? And then he'll really organize it.
And he'll go all out.
And he'll pay for everything. And there'll be none of this sort of stuff with the bill at the end. He will do it like a proper date. If a guy does that, he's beginning to think of you as, hey, this could go somewhere.
Okay. How then, on the other side now, how does a guy know that this lady is actually presenting herself for a long-term relationship, as opposed to, okay, he looks nice, I really need to kill an hour, so let's sit down and have a chat with him while I wait for the next guy?
Some of it, of course, is where you meet. I mean, you meet a girl at 2 a.m. half drunk in some very trendy pub. She's obviously not a wife. She's obviously a girlfriend. If she's wearing the skimpiest clothes, if she's dancing like a crazy lunatic, if she's got the smile on her face that you can see half a mile, she's screaming girlfriend, girlfriend, girlfriend at everybody. A wife will be a little more demure. She'll still show herself off beautifully, but it'll be a little more Audrey Hepburn than Madonna at her worst.
Right.
You know. So it's the little things, and
Wouldn't that be almost saying that for you to be a wife material, you have to be dressed in a certain way?
A little bit. I use that word demure, you know, meaning that you can still be very fashionable and very, very attractive, but things are just a little understated. The red is a bit more subtle and not quite so brash.
Discover me.
Yes.
As opposed to, well, here it's...
Yeah, take it or leave it.
Take it or leave it. What you see is what you get, more like. All right, the phone lines are open. Remember, Chris Hart in the studio, and we're talking about finding your spouse and how you can settle down and say, okay, this is wife material or this is husband material, as opposed to, well, this is just us having fun, having a drink, and after that, I still need to be found or to find. Something interesting you brought about, Chris, last week was the aspect of women actually being the one who find the man, as opposed to the other, choosing the man, as opposed to the other way around. Because I think we've always grown up knowing that the man is the one who makes the decision. He even is the one who chooses the girl. You'll even ask some ladies, you know, what's going on, and they say, well, I'm waiting to be found.
It is very true that the women do the choosing. So the men have to put themselves out there. You know, they have to go searching, but every time they present themselves in front of a woman, she will make a choice. And if she basically is, by her body language, by the size of her smile, the way her eyes look and so on, is basically saying, not impressed, most guys will back off instantly. So a girl who wants men to pay attention to her has to make choices. She has to look at a guy and give him a yes or a no. Otherwise,
is all this subconscious?
Well, it can be. It can be 100% subconscious. But if you're serious about finding a spouse, it's better to bone up on these rules and play them for what they're worth.
Yes.
You know, because, you know, if a girl goes to a party, for example, and just sits quietly with her hands on her knees and just sits there and just looks at her drink, nobody will come and talk to her. Right. But if, on the other hand, she's meeting people's eyes and she's sending the right signal which says, please come and talk to me, then everybody will.
Okay, let's talk about age difference, because that's something that also has taken a turn over time. And initially you'd find that it would always be the man who's older than the lady, but that over time seems to be changing. Is that a potential challenge for a long-term relationship? Especially when the lady's older than the...
Yes. The problem is this. The old tradition was that the man was a few years older.
Right.
And if you look at the stats around the world, they were on average 2 to 3 years older, maybe 5. And that was all driven by short life expectancy and the idea that the man, every year that goes by, a man gets slightly more wealthy. So you want an older man because he will have more money. Right. Not too old because he's not going to live all that long anyway. So, but now that's all changed because everybody's earning and people live a lot longer. So people are playing fast and loose with those old rules. It used to be that everybody got married round about the age of 20.
Right.
Pretty much everybody was married by about that time. Absolutely not true now. Lots and lots of people are not married until well into their 30s and even 40s. So suddenly there's a big pool of single people to choose from, covering a wide age span. And then when you add in the divorcees, then all of a sudden it's very wide indeed. And yes, people are changing their views on what the appropriate age difference is. You find a lot of women marrying much older men, marrying divorcees, for example. So you find 30 to 35-year-old women marrying 40 to 50-year-old men, very common. The reverse is happening, but it gets very tricky. When a man is younger than a woman, they have to be in the same place in their lives.
Place here meaning?
Meaning that, for example, a 30-year-old man is going to want children. He's going to want a family. He's probably going to want it fairly soon. If he's going out with a 40 to 42, 43-year-old woman who's got 2.4 children, she's probably not so keen.
Right.
Maybe
that may not be in her order of priorities.
Low priorities,
Right.
she's in a different place. It might be difficult for her to have another child, and so she won't be enthusiastic about that. So those two will have a problem.
Okay.
The same guy, 2 or 3 years older, with perhaps 1 or 2 children from a previous relationship, all that's gone. He doesn't mind, he's got his children. So now he can have a relationship with her, and there won't be the pressure.
Okay. This would probably bring in now the next thing that one would want to know when it comes to thinking or looking out for a potential spouse. And that's, what conversation should you have before you now settle and think this is it, in terms of your expectations,
yes,
in terms of your desires, your dreams, your future?
I think the most important thing is that the rules have changed because we now largely live an urban life.
Right.
And in an urban life, people move around a lot. You meet an incredible number of strangers. You know, your great-grandmother married somebody from within 5 kilometers around her, and they'd probably known each other all their lives. Not a big problem to find a spouse in those days. It was sort of predestined. Now, in Nairobi, you're just immersed in a sea of strangers. So the problem is sorting out the sheep from the goats, because most of those strangers won't suit you. And I'm not saying anything bad about them, they just don't match you. So you've got to very quickly sort out the ones that do match from the ones that don't. And what that means is that people have to put a lot more effort into the first few minutes of talking to one another. They've got to establish that they're both working, or whatever they're doing, that they are available, that they're leading a certain style of life, and they've got to start that track where they're beginning to tell the truth to one another. Now, most people will fail that hurdle. Most of those small talks will fail. And so they should, because they save you a lot of effort. But if you find, you know, that you picture the scene, you meet somebody at the end of a business meeting, cold light of day, you make a little small talk, and you suddenly realize the coffee's gone cold. Now you need to go and drink a lot more coffee with that person and start learning about each other in some depth. And very swiftly you can, as I say, rule out the no-hopers and make sure that you're with somebody where the relationship's going to develop well.
Okay. How does one recognize that they are ready for a relationship? Because we must admit there are times you may think you're ready, but maybe you're not ready to actually settle down for one person. You still have, you know.
Sure.
How does one actually know that now I'm ready to settle down? I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, I've watched the DVD, I'm done.
Yes. I think that the simple answer is that you're beginning to feel that the single life is a bit beneath you. That all that night-long dancing and drinking is beginning to get a bit boring. You've done it a bit too often. And you're beginning to think that you stick out a bit because you're a bit too old. You know, there you are with all the Bamba 20s, and you're thinking, I don't think I like this anymore.
We don't match.
We don't match.
I can't do this anymore.
I can't do this anymore. When you start hearing that sort of word in your mind, you're beginning to start to make the transition. You should begin to see that you prefer the married lifestyle, that you prefer to do the sort of things married people do. And when you start noticing those two things, then you are beginning to be ready to settle down in a long-term relationship.
Okay. Let's talk about, we've talked a lot about how one can identify. How can one now tell? What are some of the telltale signs that I like this person, we have a great conversation, but we're not meant for each other? Anything
flaky is the first warning. If there's something going on which says, I don't quite understand this other person's life, there's something about them which I'm not getting into, then that would be a very considerable warning that things are wrong, that you shouldn't be with that person. As you get more into the deeper conversations, you should be exploring your expectations about what a marriage is all about. You should be exploring some very simple things. Do you want to have children? You know, I know this sounds a bit scary, but you can picture these conversations slowly starting over a period of weeks. You can start to pick up things that are wrong in lifestyles. Like, for example, every wise couple pretty soon has a conversation where they say, I think you and I are an item. I don't want to see you with anybody else. And they begin to be monogamous. if that's a hard conversation to have, then you're with the wrong person. If it's perfectly obvious they're going to say no to that, and so you don't bring it up, then bail out and find somebody else.
Okay, would it be wisdom? You know, some of these conversations may seem scary if brought in at the wrong time, especially, let's take an example of having children. Here you are with your date, and maybe you've not even established whether this is steady or whatever, and you're already asking, so how many children would you like to have? And she suddenly feels pressured. Is it easier maybe to start the conversation by using yourself?
It's best to start all the conversations with very simple things, very small things, and very slowly, one step at a time, ratchet up, and making sure that the other person is comfortable with the increase in intensity, really. There's a very famous questionnaire that a psychologist called Arthur Aron developed, and it's hilarious because in 2 hours you go through the whole sequence, and the reason is that he's very carefully graded the questions. So you both sit there with the, you can imagine it, with a sheet of paper. It's on apps and things like that now, you know, and you literally ask each other the first question and you discuss it, and then you do the second, and it slowly takes you through all these things, and 2 hours later, I kid you not, people are in love. It's quite scary. So what that really shows you is that the time scale is not important. You could do it in one evening, you could take 2 years, but you have to go from A to Z. You
need to get from A to Z.
Yeah.
Are there some maybe who dwell on A for too long and
Lots of people.
Z?
Lots of people. I mean, somebody who's a bit insecure, for example, might feel very scared at upping the intensity and revealing their desires because, for example, they're scared the other person won't agree and they don't want to lose them.
Right.
Now, that's the wrong attitude. There is always somebody out there who matches what you need. So if you realize you're with somewhere where you don't match, well, get out of there.
Get out of there.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about peer pressure and friends, because one of the things that could influence your decisions is your friends.
Or your mother.
Oh, exactly. Or family, yeah. Your mother, and she sees this lady and she thinks, well, this is not really what I envisioned my son getting as a wife. So how do you deal with that?
Well, the most important thing is that as part of the preparation for finding a spouse, you must have reached the point in your life where you can stand up against people like family and actually tell them that you're going to do it your way. And of course, that's not just about spouses, it's about choice of career, it's about lifestyle, everything. You've got to be able to say, I know what I want, and I'm able to say that to friends, to family. And you need to be able to do that with a potential spouse. Either way, you know, you come under pressure to marry that girl because it's about time you had some children, you know, and you say no, I'm not ready to do that. You've got to be able to do that. Or vice versa, you've met somebody who's absolutely lovely, but the family is taking against her. If you are convinced, you've got to be able to say so. You've got to be able to stand up and say exactly what you mean. What about those who find they're with somebody who forever cannot make a decision on their own, whether it is family or friends? Maybe it's a day you've agreed on a date, but the boys come and say, hey, you know what, there's football. You mean you're not coming with us for football because of her? And suddenly he's swayed. What do you do with this kind of a person? Well, find somebody else. I mean, for both the man and the woman, you do want somebody who knows their own mind and actually is committed to what they're doing. They're in a relationship with you, and it actually has started to take first priority in their lives. And so the football games and the girls' nights have faded away because it's more important to be with the person they want to be with. If you're with somebody who's not like that, well, take the hint. You're with somebody who... Other things are more important. Other things are more important, and maybe they're not quite as into you as you think they are. So it's actually important to get out. It goes back to that thing I said a few minutes ago. Try and get past those decision points very early. The one thing you do not want to do is be dating somebody for a year, 2 years, 5 years, and you're still indecisive. Now, that's a whole big slug of your life gone. You don't want to go there. You want to have an awful lot of cups of coffee with people who get ruled out. You want to have a lot of very short relationships, just a couple of weeks maybe, with somebody who clearly isn't quite right. And then suddenly when you hit the one who seems to match perfectly, where it simply goes like clockwork from there on.
Okay, we'll take a call from Yukabeth in Homa Bay. In case you're joining us now, well, the conversation is finding your spouse. Yukabeth from Homa Bay, good morning.
Good morning to you.
Yes, right ahead to your question or comment.
Huh?
To your question or comment.
To my question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just new people at KTN, finding a spouse. Huh?
Okay.
Yeah.
What's your question?
My question is,
Mm-hmm.
I have, I don't say it's a boyfriend or a husband.
A boyfriend.
A boyfriend.
Okay.
This guy,
Mm-hmm.
I have a baby with him.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not responsible at all. How can you people help me?
How old is the baby?
Yes, a baby girl.
How old is the baby?
1 year.
1 year.
Yes.
And you live together?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Yukobeth, for your call. We'll answer you shortly. And remember, the phone lines are open in case you have a question. She's asking, how do you make baby daddy responsible? We'll also take a call from Carol in Nairobi before we answer. Carol in Nairobi, good morning. Carol in Nairobi, good morning. Do we have Carol? Maybe not. Okay, I think we've dropped that call. All right, to Yukabeth in Homa Bay.
Well, she didn't say anything that reveals her age or his. I don't know what your impression was. What do you how old do you think she is?
I'm not quite sure, but I'd say she's probably, what, below 30.
Yeah. You see, the problem is this. When people are very young, their personalities are not fully formed. And so there is a possibility that this guy, if, with a lot of encouragement, with a lot of family, shall we say, role modeling, could develop a sense of responsibility. But if he's a bit older, if he's sort of 27, 29, 30, then he's probably fixed on his path. His personality is not going to change, and the chances of him becoming responsible are pretty slim.
Okay.
So I think she needs to decide based on his age. Actually.
What to do?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, Yukabeth. Florence in Eldoret, good morning. Good morning, Florence.
Good morning.
Yes, good morning. Go right ahead, Florence.
Pardon?
Yes, you're on air. Your question or comment? Florence?
Yeah?
Yes, go right ahead. I can hear you.
I was just asking, we are talking about finding your spouse. And how can you get your spouse?
How can you do that?
Yeah, because we have been struggling and we don't get.
Because?
We have been struggling to get our spouses, but we don't get.
Oh, you've been struggling?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Florence. That's why we are having the conversation this morning. It's a struggle. But I also have a question here from Edgar via Twitter, and he's asking, how can you tell that you're rushing?
What do you mean rushing?
Rushing into a relationship. You see, I guess what he's asking is, there's that period where you're sort of sizing each other up.
Yes.
You also want to know, is this the person? But sometimes maybe you get excited.
You know, once a relationship has got past the first hour or so, and you've ruled out the complete no-hopers, you
rule out the complete no-hopers within the first hour?
Oh, absolutely. First 15 minutes. In a lot of cases, you'll have a little bit of small talk, and the other person doesn't realize that you're actually interviewing them. You're actually having this conversation, but you're structuring the questions because in your head there's a sort of checklist. My spouse must have the following characteristics, and you work that into the first 15 minutes conversation. Most will fail. You know, most of the conversations will get a black mark against them, and so you just quietly let it go. Then there'll be the odd one that gets through that first 15 minutes. You drink a little more coffee, you get past the first hour or two, and still things are looking pretty good. The moment you've got past that, things have to go according to a quite well-defined timeline if they're going to be successful. Like you spend the next 2 or 3 weeks being quite formal about the dates. You go to posh restaurants, you sit, you have a dinner together, you are talking, you are displaying your social skills, and all sorts of things. You're displaying your wealth, dare I put it that way, and so on. And then over a few more weeks, you get to that conversation where you say, I think we're an item. I don't want you to see you with someone else. Now, anybody who has gone too fast in those first few weeks would stick out like a sore thumb. You know, the guy who's professing undying love on the first date and talking about children and a marriage on the second has obviously got a screw loose.
Right.
And, you know, you should better back away, I think.
Okay.
And the same for the girl. If she's talking in ways that are clearly far too fast according to that time frame, the time frame continues, you know, up to the point where you really make the decision after about 12 months, when you've seen enough of one another to have got past all the glossy bits.
Right.
You know, you can't sustain an unrealistic lifestyle for 12 months. So you see the real person after 12 months.
All right. Let's go to Suna in Mombasa. Good morning, Suna.
Good morning.
Yes, go right ahead, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on what Dr. Pisi has said. You know, there are challenges, a lot of challenges that we meet, as we are trying to find the spouses. You get that, especially, okay, I'll categorize, you know, there are countryside and
urban.
Let's talk about town setup, because in countryside it's very easy to meet a spouse. But in town setup, it's very difficult. Like, you meet a lady, you date for some time, then later you find out that she has a kid, you know, something like that. So, but for all that time, she kept quiet, you know, such challenge.
Okay.
So, you know, it has breaks you, and you know, now going to find another spouse now, you know. Sometimes just decide to just stay single like that.
All right.
Yeah.
All right,
and the same also applies to ladies. They find out that maybe the guy had gotten married some time back and has kids, you know, something like that. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Suna. And he brings in an interesting point there, Chris. Does it matter the rules of engagement, whether you're up in an urban setting or countryside?
Well,
countryside would seem or sound much simpler.
It is. It's more traditional. People are more stable. They probably haven't moved so much. They are probably closer to their families. They are probably following in their father's footsteps, that type of lifestyle. So everything is a lot easier in a rural setting. On the other hand, your choice is less. You know, you don't have so many options. So there are advantages and disadvantages to both lifestyles, if you like. The risks are higher in an urban setting because the world's full of rogues. On the other hand, you might meet the person of your dreams. So the problem with the urban setting is you've got to be so much more careful. And you've also got to assess more people. And that leads back to the question we were asked. You know, somebody said it's hard to get started. The answer is you've got to speak to a lot of people.
Before you can...
Yes, you must. You cannot expect Prince Charming to come and knock on your door. You've actually got to be out there working, out in the marketplace, so to speak, saying hello to a lot of people. 90% of those hellos won't go anywhere. But because you're putting yourself out there, sooner or later one of them will. Okay, we have Michael in Bondo. Good morning, Michael.
Hello, good morning.
Yes, Michael.
Yeah, I want to ask a question on finding a spouse.
Could you speak up a little bit, Michael? I can hardly hear you.
Yeah, I'm saying, I want to ask you a question on finding a spouse. Is this...
Michael, you're a bit muffled. I can't quite make what you're saying.
Hello, are you getting me now?
Yes, go ahead. Just straight to the question or the comment.
Okay. There's this lady looking for something. Hello?
Yes.
But then I got some fears. Like, we've been with her time, but then now I'm realizing that she's been with her mom alone for some good way.
Sorry, Michael, I really cannot make out what you're saying. I think that the phone line is not too clear, so maybe that hopefully we'll be able to help with the question as we go along. But Chris, evidently those in the urban setting may have more challenges than those in the rural areas. And there's a question here, I think we'd already alluded to that in terms of age, but let's also talk about career. Does one, especially who's earning more, when the lady is earning more than the guy, should that be a potential challenge that one should look out for? Well,
it sounds very old-fashioned, but relationships are most stable when you have a fairly traditional setup. In other words, most of the providing is done by the man, and most of the child care stroke household things are done by the woman. And if you've got the reverse of that, you know, you've got a guy who's not particularly career oriented marrying a female CEO, for example, a lot of issues tend to arise. Yes. So I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but you're going to have to be very alert to the issues that will arise and be very clear about your expectations all the way along. I know lots of cases who've been very successful like that. Somebody highly qualified, very successful career, marrying a guy who's got a very simple career. But they obviously were very honest with one another, and they knew what they were getting into, and they're being very successful. It all boils down to this issue about you must be clear about your expectations, and you must be honest at the outset about what's happening. If you inflate your job, if you inflate your potential earnings, and you get in with somebody for whom that's important, and then later on it turns out it's the other way around, not a good place to be. So be honest. Good.
Okay, there's a common saying, just before I bring in Sophia, and welcome to the set. Sophia. I don't know if you know what jata means, but it means like flash.
And just like that, I showed up, Chris.
Hello there.
Very interesting, huh?
Yeah, so what I was going to ask is that it's commonly said that a man's heart is through his stomach. Is that true? Do you think that's true?
Well, psychologists put it rather more delicately. They say men are food-driven animals. So yes, it is true. A man who's, you know, having his stomach well looked after is going to think very kindly of the lady he's with.
Okay. Sophia.
Yes.
Welcome onto the set.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great discussion you all been having.
Yes, and
I was wondering about the tag, finding your spouse. Doesn't it finding your spouse? So you already have the spouse, so if they've gotten lost, you're looking for them. You get what I'm saying? On a lighter note.
Yes, yes.
But good discussion.
Thank you.
Very many single people out there.
Yeah.
Yes, so and quite a number of them tweeting to say that they're getting a lot of help, and thank you, Chris, because I think it is genuinely a challenge for many.
Yes, it is.
For the women, they're wondering, where are the men?
Yes.
Well, you know, the big problem for women is they must start early enough.
Yeah.
You know, the big problem is that an awful lot of women are not actually seriously starting looking for a good man until they're 32, 33. Most of the men have married for the first time by that time.
Yeah.
And they need to know that, and they need to think, hang on, I should start a little earlier.
All right.
Brilliant.
We'll let it there.
Well, that's time is up, and we'll have to wind it up right there. And there's some comments that are coming in. You had a very heated up newsroom today as well.
Yes, that was quite something.
At some point, I thought we needed Jeff's fire extinguisher.
Yeah, you should have brought it in the middle of the show.
Well, I looked for one, and the safety guy told me that I can't remove the one that's on the corridor.
The one on the corridor, lest
that's to tell you we have one.
All right, well, we'll end the show there. Thank you so much for watching. It's always a pleasure to be with you every single day. Now, we will have at 10 a.m. you want to be with KTN. We'll have a news update. That's starting today, and every other day we'll be having news updates. So the morning show doesn't end here. We're just taking a break, but we'll be back with more news at 10 to just keep you updated on the stories we are following for you. So KTN is where to stay because we've got you covered. Certainly have you covered. So we'll take a short break and we'll be right back. Do keep it KTN. And well, we'll be back at 10. Yes, we'll be back at 10. But for now, kwaheri.